Welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. We are so glad you're joining us today. I am your podcast co-host, Lindsay Few, and in the studio with me is Dr. Kimberling. And Dr. Kim has been a marriage counselor for 40 plus years, and he's been married for over 54 years. So he is the man for the job. And good thing, because today we have a lot of listener questions to answer. We've got a lot of questions from listeners about how to forgive and restore your marriage after your marriage has been damaged by porn use. So if you're recovering from a porn addiction or from the use of porn today, this episode is for you. Unfortunately, it's a pretty common issue that we hear about, but the good news is that we have created several practical tools to help you heal and recover and move forward. So make sure you stick around through the end of today's episode to make sure you get access to all of those resources after we answer listener questions. So, Dr. Kim, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, we got a lot of questions for you. So the first one we have is from a listener who says, my wife does not want to seek counseling and cannot forgive me for my porn use. I attend a men's group with addictions. How can I deal with the rejection besides praying and seeking counseling?
Yeah, that's, I think people recover in different ways. Some people really just shut down, like it seems like this wife is.
Mm-hmm.
She's just probably been very hurt. And so she's just kind of stuck right now. So what I would, it sounds like he's doing some good things. He's praying, seeking counseling. He's in a recovery group. So all those things are really good. I think what I would say, a couple of things. One, continue to pray, because you don't want to get resentful of her because she's taken a while to recover. And I think do the things that you can do. If you feel like you need to be in a counseling in addition to things you're doing, I think that'd be great. Encouraging her, trying to be the best husband you can in every other way. But it's a tough situation. I would love it if she'd go to counseling with you, but that may not happen, and certainly may not happen for a while. So I think you continue to do the things that are good for you, and there's helping in your recovery. And I think you can share some of the things that you're learning with her. Don't overdo that, kind of see how she takes that. But I think letting her know that, hey, I am working on this, and I am not going to let this porn dominate my life. And I want your forgiveness, and I want us to have a good marriage. And so this is what I can do right now as my part. And hopefully at some point she'll agree to take that step forward. I'd love to know for her, there's got to be some real hurt there, got to be some real things that she's probably not dealing with that she needs to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. How long, have you seen spouses need to go through that before the other one's kind of ready to deal?
I think that the forgiveness part is such an important issue. And I really talk to couples about that usually the first time, because usually it's a process, like for a wife,
Mm-hmm.
like in this situation. I mean, but I think we know that Christ has told us to forgive because he's forgiven us, that we're supposed to forgive others. And there's so many reasons we need to forgive. One, over
Mm-hmm.
time, it hurts us a lot more than it does the other person. It causes a lot of anger and bitterness, all kinds of negative things happen when we can't forgive.
Mm-hmm.
So at least I ask people to begin praying to say, God, help me to be able to forgive. Help me to walk on that path. Help me to get to that point of total forgiveness. So at least that's one of the focuses there. So I would
Mm-hmm.
encourage her to do that. Any woman in that situation, that forgiveness has to be a part of it. Once I think you get on that path of forgiveness, I think you're maybe better able to receive the things your spouse is doing to improve or to get
Mm-hmm.
healthy. And so I think sometimes if you don't take that step, you're really closed off to those things. And no matter
Mm-hmm.
what your spouse is doing, you're really not seeing it, or you're really not embracing it. And so that's, none of those negative things that are going to help your marriage long term. And if you really
Right.
want your marriage to work, if you really want to build something and even have a testimony because you went through this and came out the other side, certainly your husband has a lot of things he has to do. But
Mm-hmm.
the wife has some responsibilities that she has to do for the marriage to heal and for her to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like that you said, just in answering this question to the spouse who's recovering, that the things they're going to be doing are good for them and good for the
Yes.
marriage. So it really works together, and it's going to put them on a personal healing and growth track. And then the same for the spouse when she's ready, hopefully to forgive and move forward, they're both going to be growing healthier.
I think so too. And because I think most men that I've talked to had no idea how devastating that was going to be to their wife when they were using
Mm-hmm.
porn. And so just that knowledge, or just understanding that, has been a huge help to men. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really helped them in their growth of understanding more about their wife and women and what porn
Mm-hmm.
does to the person that you committed your life to. And so I think I've just seen some guys just almost, well, I've seen some guys weep because of that,
Mhm.
because it's like I did something really bad, something really stupid. I knew she wasn't going to like it, but I had no idea it was going to affect her at this level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard reality.
It is.
Mhm. Yeah. So, okay, so that's question number 1. Let's move on to question number 2. How can I continue to combat porn when it periodically appears without me seeking it out?
Yeah, I think we live in a very culture that's very sex oriented. So things, and it
Mhm.
kind of depends on how you define porn. I mean, you can, you know, even sometimes maybe billboards or things
Mm.
you see on TV, things that, it's just going to pop in there. So I think a couple things. One, I think you do stay away from the places that porn is going to be for sure.
Mhm.
And it sounds like he's probably doing that. And the other thing is just realize that you've got to get away from it, bounce your
Mm.
eyes, get in a different situation. I think make sure you've got everything you can on your phones and devices, any
Mhm.
kind of software, anything that's going to help filter out things that you can certainly some things still seem to sneak through, but the things
Mhm.
that are going to help eliminate those things from popping up on your device or your phone or things like that. And then
Mhm.
I think knowing just I think pre-deciding what are you going to do when it does pop up, because I
Mhm.
think you need a plan, because I think
Mhm.
it's really easy for it to pop up and then you start rationalizing and then all of a sudden you feel like, oh my gosh, I've fallen back into this again.
Mhm.
And so to know that when something pops up, I'm going to walk away from my device, walk away from the computer. I'm going to do something, get involved in something that is positive.
Mhm.
Maybe go take a walk, maybe go
Mhm.
exercise, maybe call a friend, maybe
Mhm.
anything that's going to redirect your thoughts at that time. But I think it's so important to have a plan so that when it comes, okay, this is what I do, and not
Mhm.
just, well, I'll figure that out when it happens. No, let's go ahead and make a plan now,
Right.
so that when
Mhm.
it does come up, you've got a plan already in place, and you know what you're going to do. And I think that's going to help your spouse very much
Mhm.
so, of knowing that you can't hide from everything today. Things are going to
Mhm.
pop up,
Mhm.
they just do. And sometimes it's not porn. It's just, I've noticed a lot of times when I'm reading an article, there'll be an ad in the middle of the article,
Mm.
and the
Mhm.
ad will have nothing to do with a woman in the bathing suit, but that woman in the
Mhm.
bathing suit is on that ad. And so
Mhm.
things do pop up. And so you've got
Yeah.
to, okay, so you just keep scrolling past that and you're reading an article, read the article. So
Mhm.
just having a plan, I think, will help a lot.
Yeah, I think you're right, 'cause it's true. There's going to be temptation, even if
Yes,
eliminated every avenue. You can't take away even the maybe images that are in your head, or maybe people that are in
exactly.
person. And so, if running away from temptation, we are called to flee temptation, but we can't flee the fact that it exists in the world. And so, I think your point about building up some resiliency around that is really important, because if we're just trying to hide from it, we're going to end up in a cave. But if we can learn how to pre-decide what you're going to do to deal with it, then that could be really helpful. You mentioned some activities that kind of shake you up and get you out of that. I think another thing to think about is, when are the times of vulnerability,
Mm,
because you had a great episode with Matt Klein a couple year and a half while ago, that we'll link to in the show notes, but he talked about, having coping mechanisms, and the fact that a lot of times people are more vulnerable if they are in a stressful situation. Maybe they're
right.
overtired or feeling, you know, bad about themselves that day. And so, if you have some sort of coping mechanisms in place that you've pre-decided to handle those feelings, instead of just kind of, well, let's just pop on the phone and see what happens, kind of
Right.
mindlessly, then you're really placing yourself in a really dangerous situation.
Absolutely. And I think it's important, we talked about it before, but remembering that temptation itself is not sin. Jesus was
Mm-hmm.
tempted, but he didn't
Mm-hmm.
sin. So because you're tempted, that doesn't mean you did anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you do once you are tempted.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was tempted, he didn't sin. And I think that's what, when this situation or any situation with sin, that when we're tempted, we don't want to take that path of sin. We want to use that
Mm-hmm.
temptation as a red flag to drive us to things that are going to be good for us, take us away from porn, be good for our marriage, things like that.
Mm-hmm. That's so wise. That was really well said. Yeah. Use that as a red flag to drive you away from the temptation.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if we just expect that we'll never be tempted, then we're gonna be sorely disappointed by life. But if we have
Right.
if we
Right.
have we have some
Yes.
plans in place, then we can actually use it to drive us back to Jesus, which is really hopeful.
Absolutely. I mean, you can use this as a way to grow your faith because God is
Mhm.
there for you. He does have a way out for you. And
Yes.
so it's if you turn to him and you see that he is there for you and he does provide that way out and he's helps you resist temptation, that can grow your faith at a time when you just feel like, well, I'm really struggling. Yeah, you're struggling,
Yeah.
but God's there with you in this struggle.
Yeah, I mean, it says, "Resist the devil and he will flee from you." When you're
Yeah,
tempted, he will provide a way out. Like that's an
absolutely.
option. We just I mean, I'd be quoting the scripture right out loud, in the moment of
Yeah,
temptation, "Resist the devil and he'll flee from you." You want that guy to flee. That's good.
absolutely.
That's good. Okay, so this next question says, "What do you do when your wife doesn't believe you when you tell her she's beautiful?"
I think it's hard for women in our culture anyway, and I think when the husband has been in porn, she feels like, well, he's chosen that over me anyway,
Mhm.
so he must think those people are prettier than me, all those kind of things. And so you've got to build that back, and I think that does take time to do that. Use your actions a lot, not just your words. Tell her she's beautiful,
Mm.
but things that you can do for her, serve her, come alongside her. If you can be specific about beautiful, just maybe
Mhm.
you say today, gosh, I love the way you did your hair today. Or I love, I love it when you smile like that. That smile, nobody has a smile like you've got. But looking for things where you can be very specific to her, because women compare themselves all the time anyway. And so you
Mhm.
want to hit at the things, just ask God to help you for one thing, and he'll bring some things to mind. You'll look at your wife and you'll think, oh my gosh, I never noticed that about her in this way before. So I need to tell
Mhm.
her that. Be understanding with that. I think about
Mhm.
her doubting, you being sincere in that. She's got a It's a process for her to get back to that. You staying away from porn, you getting healthy, you are
Mhm.
then in her mind hopefully choosing her over all that other stuff. And so
Mhm.
as she sees you continue in that, I think it'll be easier for her to believe it, the words you say when you tell her how pretty she is, how beautiful she is. And so as you're doing that, as you're building trust in the relationship, hopefully over time, she's going to hear that because every woman wants to think her husband thinks she's beautiful. She
Mhm.
wants to hear those words. And you want her to receive those words. You've done something that has put a big barrier between that,
Mhm.
but you also have the opportunity to remove that barrier.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. It's it's really pretty evil, I feel like, of the enemy because this really strikes at an already existing wound for a lot of women because there's culturally like you mentioned, there's a really strong temptation for women to think they have to compete,
Yes.
against famous actors or stars or people who are sort of seen as the standard of beauty, and I don't think that that is a healthy thing, but I think that's very very common. And
Right.
so the fact that porn use drives a real wedge right into the heart of that wound is very nefarious, and also adds to the fact that the sexual relationship is so vulnerable and so personal. And so this is just adding another layer that I think you just have to recognize that that's already existing even before
Hmm.
porn use damaged the marriage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Mhm.
You said that really well because I think it's true. And I see that in women all the time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I don't know what it's like to be a man in the culture, but I do know that that's something that every woman is at least conscious of, even if she doesn't actively struggle. And so while I don't understand the pressures of being a male, I do think that that's something where it helps when we can shed light on that for each other, across
Absolutely.
from husbands to wives. And it's hard to hear from our own spouse sometimes because it's just so personal.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was some really good advice, Dr. Kim. So our next question says, "I'm a woman who struggles with porn. Am I the only one?"
No, you're not alone. I don't mean to laugh because it isn't, but I think we don't, for so much, we just did put it on the guys.
Mhm.
But I think there's all kinds of new things. There's novels, there's books, things like that that women have. Maybe they have a different type of porn than their
Mhm.
husbands had. I think there's also now some support groups for women that
Mhm.
want to get out of that. And what was your vulnerability? What caused you to go there? So counseling might be really
Mhm.
helpful. To say,
Mhm.
why was I? vulnerable to this? Is there something from the past that I haven't dealt with or that hasn't surfaced yet? Digging into it and see, okay, where is my vulnerability? Understanding what drove you to that can be very
Mm-hmm.
helpful in overcoming that, just that awareness and knowing. And then I think just looking for I think there's beginning to be some resources for women
Mm-hmm.
overcoming porn use. And so avail yourself of those kind of things. Counseling might be really good for you as far as
Mm-hmm.
getting in deep and understand why that's been a struggle for you. And then I think too, once you identify that, then what are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
What are your next steps?
Mm-hmm.
And with your counselor making a plan there, maybe your spouse has just you feel like emotionally he's abandoned you. Well,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, as he understands what that's done to you, he'll be willing to maybe go to counseling with you or to help in those areas. But there's some
Mm-hmm.
reason that was attractive to you and why you got into it. And so find
Mm-hmm.
out what it is and then make the steps of what are we going to do about
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the recovery process is still going to be pretty similar. I mean, one of the
it. It is.
biggest first things is to recognize that you're not alone and to stop
Yes.
keeping it to yourself, because isolation is one of the most productive places for sin to thrive. If we think that we're isolated, if we keep ourselves isolated, if we allow shame to keep us isolated, we're going to be very vulnerable and we're not going to
Hmm.
recover. And there's a reason that James 5 says that there's healing in confession, because when you start to speak things out loud, you do really remove a lot of the power from it. So I've seen more resources. One of the main places I do, actually, I don't want to mention that. I was going to say I find good resources on Instagram because I'm vetting our guests, but I don't really think that's a good place to send people for this topic
Okay.
unless we have specific, because their algorithm is probably not like mine, full of marriage counselors.
That's
Let
good
me
point.
pause. I'll go back. Yes, there are more great resources. One podcast that comes to mind specifically is the Java with Julie podcast. Julie Slattery is a past guest on Awesome Marriage, and
Yes.
she deals specifically with Christian sexuality. So she is going to have a little more topical stuff in that regard. So she is a very trustworthy biblical resource on the topic. Anything really sex related, but I've seen some more things she's intersected with for women specifically struggling with porn.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because I think in some ways it's very much similar to men, really understanding what is God's plan for sex, what was God's purpose, and that knowing that it was good and it was a gift. In our culture, the enemy has distorted it so badly, and so I think
Mhm.
once part of the healing in overcoming porn addiction, whether you're a female or a male, is to realize, okay, well, that's not part of God's plan. God doesn't want
Mhm.
us to objectify other people. God doesn't want us to fantasize about or with other people. And understanding what it is in marriage, and then and then you've got your target. Now, okay,
Mhm.
this is where I was, and this is where I want to go. And now, what steps do I take to get there?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Kind of bringing it back to like the purpose, the intent, and what God has for us there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, this next question's gets a little deep. So stick with me.
Okay.
So I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, but this listener says, "My wife says that I betrayed her by making a comment on social media to a woman that I've never met about how her body looks. She said it was spiritual adultery and is grounds for divorce. Now we have moments where we get along great, and other times she withdraws. I deleted all my social media accounts to build trust with her. I've been getting counseling and going to a Sexaholics Anonymous because I objectify women. Is there anything I can do to show her that she can trust me and see that what I'm doing, if there's anything needed to make it right?"
Wow. And it's interesting as we just look at that, how different things affect different people. There's probably some women that would see that and then talk to their husband about it and he'd say, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that and move on,
Mm-hmm.
ask for
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness and move on. For her, this is a really big deal. And so I think you have to acknowledge that
Mm-hmm.
to her. You want to keep doing the things you're doing, keep doing your counseling, your recovery work, those kind of things. I think you want to let her know the progress that you're making, what you're
Mm-hmm.
learning through that process. You can only say, I'm sorry so many times. I
Mm-hmm.
think once you've really told her that this is something that you're sorry you did, very remorseful about it, that you would never do anything like that again to hurt her, but make sure she hears that really well.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe you can even ask her, is there something that I could do that would help rebuild trust?
Mhm.
Sometimes wives are very willing to share that, and they know better than anything of
Mhm.
what's going to help her. And so, if she may be able to give you some ideas there of what can help, how can you help her through this? And then I think continue to work on yourself. Why do you objectify women? Why has that become such an important thing for you? And understanding it, finding your root cause, and then beginning to come out of that, to heal from that, and so that's not something that dominates your life in the future going forward.
Mhm. Yeah. That's good. And those are good steps. I had not heard of going to Sexaholics Anonymous for objectifying women. Have you heard of that application of it?
Haven't either, but I would imagine that they probably that certainly would be appropriate. I think I could see how
Mhm.
that would work there. So I think it is. There's so many different, Matt Klein on his website, Restored, has a lot of great resources there to help men getting out
Mhm.
of porn. And I
Mhm.
guess there's, objectifying women, porn, it's kind of it goes hand in hand, very much so
Mhm.
on that. I do want to say I don't know. I think when he said that she felt it was spiritual adultery and is grounds for divorce. Okay, Jesus said when we left after someone in our heart that is adultery, so it is. But the grounds for divorce, as I understand it, when it comes to infidelity, is if there's not repentance, if
Hmm.
there's not a turn. And in this
Mhm.
situation, I think he sounds like he's doing the right things to get out of that. He's in a group. He's
Mhm.
getting counseling. He's doing these things to get away from it. So in that situation, is that really grounds for divorce? I I don't know that it is.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point because, there's a lot there are grounds for divorce biblically. There
Yes.
are. But if you're looking for them, if you're looking for your spouse to step into that area where you have a reason to divorce them, I'm not sure that we're taking that direction in good faith, right? So, like Jesus said, he gave concessions. He said, because your hearts were hard, there
Hmm.
were concessions to allow for divorce. He didn't say, I would prefer that you would just go ahead and do this. He said, you know, because of the temptation to be hardened toward one another, or, there were grounds for divorce given as like a way out so that things didn't become worse between spouses. But it wasn't meant as a thing that you go, oh, whoop, you stepped across, you're out.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, God, we know how much God loves marriage. We know in the Bible it says God hates divorce. He doesn't say he hates
Mm-hmm.
divorced people, but he says he hates
Mm-hmm.
divorce. And so I think in whatever situation we find ourselves in, that if there's a possibility of healing and there's repentance and forgiveness and understanding
Mm-hmm.
and the desire to build something much better than what you had, then yeah, why miss out on that?
Yeah. Yeah.
If this guy was saying it wasn't a big deal, that shouldn't upset you. I can do that
Mm-hmm.
all the time. I'm not doing anything with her. I don't even know who
Mm-hmm.
she is. Then that's a different story. Then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you're not repentant. You're not understanding what this is doing to your life and how it affected her.
Right.
And the other thing I think is important is that it's not if it was Nancy on that situation, it is not my role to judge how something affects her.
Right.
I want her to tell me exactly what she feels, what she thinks, how it affects her, and I need to
Mm-hmm.
accept that. I may look at it
Mm-hmm.
totally different. I may think that's silly. Why does that bother you? The
Mm-hmm.
fact is, in a marriage, I need to value, if it's important to her, I got to make it important to me. And
Yeah.
so in this situation, if I had posted something on somebody's picture and that upset Nancy, then absolutely I need to make that important to me and say I'm not going to do that again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think too, like you're saying, there is a heart change, or at least there's evidence of a heart change. I mean, if you delete your social media accounts, but you keep making weird comments to women, that's not the heart change. You know what I mean? Like it's
No,
not about it's not
no.
about just do XYZ and then you're healed. You actually have to be truly changed. And so there's a part of me that says it's wondering there could be some real hardness of heart on either side here, but it
Yeah.
could be that she's seeing evidence in other areas that doesn't reveal a heart change, or it could, we don't really know what the case is based on this, but it's not enough just to delete the social media, go to the meeting. I said I went to the meeting, I checked the box. We also, the spouse needs to see some change of heart there. And I'm hoping that that is the case.
Yeah, and I think you pray for that. Father,
Yeah.
help me to see the heart change here. And because I think you want to see that, and so asking God's help in seeing that, I think is always helpful.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most affirming things we can do for our marriage is to ask God to help us see him in our spouse, to
Yeah.
help see our spouse through his eyes. That's always going to really help things.
Oh, absolutely. Because He loves your spouse.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know.
Yeah. And he wants their heart to change too.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So this next question is from a couple. It says, "How do we as a couple move forward from the shame of past porn use and those memories associated with it?"
I think the Lord doesn't want us to get stuck in shame. I think the
Mhm.
enemy would love for us to, because we are pretty ineffective when we're shameful in
Mhm.
so many different ways. And so I think realizing that that is not a place where God would have you be, that He
Mhm.
wants you healed, He wants you moving forward. The memories may take some time because they're
Mhm.
there. And what I've seen in couples is when there has been, say, porn use and the healing begins to take place, the closer you become in your marriage, the better your marriage gets, the farther that those memories fade in the
Mm.
background. And because of what you're building here, you see this is so much better than anything I could have ever imagined that porn was going
Mhm.
to do for me. And so it's taking that time in that process to build what God wants you to build in your sex relationship, in your marriage, and knowing that is so good that it doesn't mean you still might not get tempted, because I think we all have to realize we're always vulnerable. But you're
Mhm.
thinking, why in the world would I ever give up this to go back to that? And so I think
Mhm.
that's, hopefully you'll see that over time. Certainly, if you're going to Christian counseling, that can certainly help. Just, sometimes it's the hardest thing in the forgiveness. Maybe your spouse forgives you, God forgives you, and it's hard for you to forgive yourself. And I've always looked at it like, okay, if God has forgiven me, who created the universe and everything else,
Mhm.
why should I not be able to forgive myself?
Yeah.
And so I think if we look at it that way, that yes, you've got to forgive yourself. Sometimes we just want to keep beating ourselves up for a while. And then I think you want to replace those past memories with new good memories together.
Mhm.
So the more things you do, the more good memories you can recreate, the better your sex life becomes together. The other kind of
Mhm.
things that you guys do together that creates great memories, those kind of things. And learning to know that, we talked in my book, we talk about intimacy being different than sex, that the intimacy leads to sex, but intimacy on its own is just that closeness, that bonding. And so work on that part of your relationship, the non-sexual part of it, just connecting, with activities, things you like, things that draw you closer together emotionally, those kind of things that really bond you together too. And you're
Mhm.
and you're rebuilding something that, as you rebuild it, it's not like you have to build this work and then finally get there. I mean, that is true, but there's a lot of joy that comes along the way, and a lot of healing that comes along the way, and a lot of positive
Mhm.
things that can happen in your marriage along the way. And it's
Yeah.
probably one of those things that maybe you don't just arrive at some point. You just keep doing
Mhm.
that because your marriage keeps getting better because you're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. I mean, I feel like that's really good because there's a lot to it. The forgiveness process. I think what you said was so good is that God doesn't want us stuck in shame, but the enemy sure
No.
does.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I see people stuck in that, and it's like they just can't forgive themselves. It's like they can commit an unforgivable sin. But I mean, if you're
Mhm.
really saying that, you're really saying to Jesus, you need to get up on that cross again,
Mm.
because what you did, you covered everybody's sins except this one thing I did. And that's not true.
Yeah. It's
His
not true.
his death covered all of our sins, which is
Yeah.
so amazing.
I know. Yeah, you really have I think you really have to get to the place where you realize what you just said is true,
Hmm.
that he really did cover it and there's nothing more we can add to that. We're only taking away when we don't accept it. We're not
Right.
adding.
And he did it. One of the reasons is so we wouldn't get locked up in shame,
Right.
because we don't
Mhm.
need to be there.
Right. Yeah, but it is an active process. I mean, it doesn't just
Hmm.
go away. You do have to actually participate in that process
Absolutely.
to find that freedom. Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
All right, next question. Can I work on getting free from porn without letting my spouse know? I've struggled with porn in the past. I'm currently taking steps to be porn free. Do I need to tell my spouse about my previous porn use?
My feeling is that we should always be honest with our spouse, that we need to get everything on the table. That she need to know, and see how much she wants to know about what previous porn use is. But I would never want anything to be a barrier between Nancy and I. And I would not want
Mm-hmm.
something to come up later that might hurt her. And she'd say, why didn't you tell me about it? And so we've always tried to be really honest with each other about everything and really open with each other, whether it was good or whether it was bad. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
been healthy for us. I think secrecy, I mean, I would feel like I was maybe hiding something. Should be trusting me in an area that I know in my heart I'm really not trustworthy in. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think those are all good reasons that I think we just need to do it. I'm glad he's taken the steps to get porn free.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think is, if your marriage is going to grow, your spouse needs to be I want Nancy to be praying for me about something. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
going through something, I want her prayers, because I think
Mm-hmm.
in that, one, God hears those prayers. It's going to help me. But two, I think it connects us. It puts
Mm-hmm.
the problem becomes then something that we're working on together. I've got
Mm-hmm.
to do most of the hard work, but she's praying. God's working,
Mm-hmm.
those kind of things. And if you're in that situation, I would suggest finding a Christian counselor maybe to go to first and talk it through with them, kind of take their guidance. But my experience has been most counselors agree with me of let's get everything on the table so we can deal with it. So
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing hidden.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And you're right. Like that, the area of trust, if you trust a spouse that's not trustworthy, at some point there's going to be a gap there,
There he
you
is.
know?
There
Yeah.
he is. And I think too, when you share that he's got his kind of his plan for recovery, things he's doing, I think that
Mm-hmm.
helps.
Mm-hmm.
If you come to your spouse and she didn't, most of the time it seems like the wife discovers the porn or the porn use.
Mm-hmm.
But if she
Mm-hmm.
hasn't and God's leading you to confess, get your plan in order. Maybe you go ahead and go to the counselor. What do I need to do? And the counselor suggests, well, here's an you need an accountability partner.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a group I think would be helpful, blah, blah, blah. Stay in counseling, do these kind of things. Then when you come to your spouse, the fact that you have taken steps and you have a plan for recovery, I think is going to help a lot also.
Yeah. 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 Coming clean is always an important part of healing, I think. I
I do
mean,
too.
yeah. Just thinking through like when I've seen this situation play out in life with people who lived through this, the kind of thought was, well, if you didn't tell me till later, it kind of undermines the trust you're now trying to rebuild because
Hmm.
you waited and didn't get it on the table. So it was a like, how can I trust this confession when, the trust you didn't make the confession until some arbitrary point in time, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. And I know, I've had guys say, well, I just don't want to hurt her.
Mhm.
I just still think you need to tell. I just think
Mhm.
keeping secrets is not going to be healthy long term for your marriage, like you were talking about, Lindsay. It's just not.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, because it did have an effect on the marriage even if she didn't explicitly know. It was
Hmm.
affecting the marriage because it was affecting you.
Exactly. And I think
Mhm.
it will. I mean, I think I don't know, unless you can really compartmentalize really, really, really good, a lot better than I can,
Mhm.
it's going to come out some way.
Right. And you probably don't know really how until retrospectively you look back and you realize what was what it was keeping you from.
Yeah, I've never had anybody that I can remember confess that regretted it.
Mm.
Sure, they had things to work through, but it was like it took this load off that they needed to get off. Now,
Yeah.
sometimes the spouse feels like you put it on them, but
Sure.
it's the first step, I think,
Mhm.
is just being totally honest with it, saying things that you thought you wouldn't be able to say.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good place to start. All right. So we have one more question from a listener
Okay.
today. And this one's a little different because this person says, what if your spouse who was betrayed does not understand the impact of porn and they say they do not feel pain as a result?
That's interesting because I
Hmm.
don't know that I've ever experienced it. I've seen certainly it affect people in different ways. Maybe I've had someone that grew up with porn in their home in the family of origin. They grew up, they saw the damage
Hmm.
there, thought they would never have that in their marriage. And so the husband gets into some type of porn, and boy, it's just really, really devastating. So I think it depends on what I wouldn't judge the reaction. I think
Mhm.
most people are going to react in some way. So
Mhm.
they may be, they could be in denial. There could be a number of one of things. Maybe they just aren't in touch with those feelings and they're kind of afraid
Mhm.
to get in touch with them. I think couples counseling with a Christian counselor could really be good. Maybe the counselor
Mhm.
could lead into some things just to help explore that together, because I just don't think that's a normal response. And
Mhm.
so then as a counselor, you kind of like, okay, what's behind that? Why is this response? Why does this not seem to be affecting this person
Mhm.
when 99.9% of the women would be affected in some way by their husband looking at porn? Because it's not about, I mean, it sounds like this husband knows that it should cause his wife pain, that what he did wasn't right. It's not like two
Mhm.
people have chosen to let porn be a part of their lifestyle. And so,
Right.
which is, this is something that he's taking serious, and then she's not reacting in the same way. And he probably, some people think, well, I wish my wife would react that way, but it's just not normal.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I think you also, and a counselor can help you guys start rebuilding or building intimacy, connection, all these kind of things, what needs to be rebuilt in the marriage or built in the
Mhm.
marriage. And at some point, I would think that your spouse is going to let those feelings come out of how they felt about that. And maybe it's just that
Yeah.
they just can't deal with the feeling of, you rejected me, you chose somebody else. A lot of possibilities there.
Mhm.
So that's where I think counseling can really be a help in that situation for sure.
Right. Yeah, 'cause it's like you talked about in the question before about this, like, compartmentalizing.
Hmm.
You said if somebody might be able to work through something if they really compartmentalize, but at a certain point, that's really not healthy. At a
No,
certain
it's
point,
not.
that level of compartmentalizing is an unhealthy coping mechanism and not something that's going to help the relationship. Because I'm thinking if there's not an emotional engagement with what the spouse is looking at and interacting with, in the sexual arena, like there's something emotionally that's shut off or not lining up.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think every spouse takes it personal. And for some
Mhm.
reason, she's not. It doesn't sound like. So why?
Well, one other thing that this question makes me think of, because you have mentioned I in a past episode, if it was reversed, so if it was the wife using porn and then the husband, you have mentioned that husbands tend to react a little differently. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Because usually
Mhm.
the husbands, it's more the fantasy stuff that the wife uses. 50 Shades of
Mhm.
Grey, that was so
Mhm.
popular, and it's amazing how many women read that book. And so I think it's a little different. I don't think a man personalizes it,
Hmm.
that you're choosing me over that. Is it like maybe where a man takes it is, do what I need to do to romance you better? Maybe I'm not
Hmm.
romancing you enough. Maybe I'm not. We need to talk about our sex life. We need to talk
Mhm.
about what we both want our sex life to be. And maybe it's more than just a sex life. Maybe it's how I treat my wife the rest of the day, or, yeah,
Mhm.
I think for a guy, it's like what I need to do to, can I fulfill that need for her?
Mhm.
And the need may not be healthy. I mean, that's another thing. That's another place a
Mm.
Christian counselor could help too. Is this a healthy need she's satisfying in an unhealthy way, or is it an
Mhm.
unhealthy need that she's satisfying in an unhealthy way?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's a lot to look at from that standpoint.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And I think for both both of those, Christian counseling we could really help because then you're going to understand your spouse's perspective more in a way that they're not really able to articulate right now.
Right. Exactly. But I do think, I'm just thinking about the guys that, and I have I've had worked with a number of couples where the wife is the one who's gone out of the marriage and committed adultery, but I
Mhm.
haven't seen much where there's porn use by the wife. And it's just
Mhm.
in my experience in it. But the little
Mhm.
bit that I have, this is kind of how I would think the guys would be affected by it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so either way there's a conversation there. There's
Yes.
something, to uncover and kind of rebuild into. Yeah. Well, Dr. Kim, that concludes our listener questions for today. We do have more questions that we will be answering, and these other ones will be from the perspective of the betrayed spouse. So today we focused really on the recovering spouse, how to recover. Next time we'll be talking more about the betrayed spouse and what they can do. So this has been a really insightful conversation. Do you have any final piece of advice for our listeners today?
Well, I love it when we get questions. I
Mhm.
love it when you send us your questions, whatever the topic is. And if you followed us, periodically we take time to answer those questions. A lot of them we'll just answer with an email or try to help you out that way. But I think just the whole thing with porn, being such a prevalent thing in our culture, I deal with it every week with people in counseling at one
Mm-hmm.
level or another, sometimes with their spouse, sometimes with a child, those kind of
Mm-hmm.
things. And so it's something that's real in our culture. I think the more that we can do to be healthy in our own lives of how we deal with porn, deal with it in a way that honors God. It's one person at a time, but that's going to affect your family, and hopefully your
Mm-hmm.
family affects other families. And so it's a battle I think we all need to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So keep fighting the battle. We discussed it. God provides a way out when the temptation comes. So
Hmm.
this is certainly some hope to end with.
Yes.
One other hopeful resource I want to point you to as we're closing out this episode is our 5 Steps to Healing After Porn Betrayal webinar. This is a webinar that's really going to help you take the steps you need to have a marriage that is undefiled so you can have closeness and intimacy again. So in this free webinar that Dr. Kim is teaching, it's a 45-minute class. It's free. It's simple to sign up for, but you do need to save a space. So we'll have a link to sign up to that in today's show notes, just to help you really get started on that healing process. Whether it was something recent or in the past, this webinar can help. So make sure to check out that link in today's show notes for the free 5 Steps to Healing After Porn Betrayal webinar. And we'll also have links to the other resources mentioned today so that you can check out all those things in today's show notes and just really take the steps you need. And of course, Dr. Kim mentioned too that we love to hear from you. So if you have any questions, we need prayer, anything that we can do for you, don't hesitate to reach out at info@awesomemarriage.com. So thanks so much for taking the time to share with us today on the Awesome Marriage Podcast. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.